Today we're diving into Hidden Therapies 2, a book by Jerzy Ziba that, to put it mildly, throws a massive challenge at the feet of conventional medicine. It's written with a very clear goal, to tell you, the average person, things that, as the author puts it, you will never hear from your doctor.
And right away, the author's approach is key. He tells you this isn't going to be some stuffy academic textbook. He wants it to feel like you're just having a chat, making his pretty controversial ideas feel way more accessible. He even uses emoticons in the book, which, well, that tells you a lot about the style right there.
So, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll look at the author's whole mission. Then, we'll get into his big claims about vitamin C, his takedown of cholesterol drugs, his very different theory of cancer, and finally, we'll land on a pretty big question that all of this raises.
So everything in this book, and I mean everything, is built on this one central idea. Jerzy Ziba sets himself up as an outsider who's here to reveal suppressed truths. He's not just giving you info, he's on a mission. He's trying to shake up what he sees as a rigid and, in his view, sometimes deceptive medical world.
And this framing is really important. The author is super careful to say, hey, this book is not a treatment manual. Instead, he's presenting it as a source of inspiration, a collection of information that he hopes will get both doctors and patients thinking outside the box, searching for better, maybe safer ways to heal.
All right, let's get to the first huge pillar of his argument, vitamin C. But look, we are not talking about taking a tablet to ward off a cold here. Ziba presents vitamin C as this incredibly powerful weapon against some of the most serious diseases you can imagine. And he uses these really powerful personal stories to drive the point home. He shares this one anecdote from a seminar attendee who told him about 3 friends with metastatic cancer, we're talking bone, liver, and lung cancer, who he says cured themselves just by reading the first book and applying its ideas. So right away, vitamin C is framed not as a supplement, but as a potential lifesaver.
So you're probably asking, how does he claim this works? Well, the whole theory really hangs on this one concept: oxidative stress. Ziba basically argues that every single disease, and he says there are no exceptions, is tied to this massive wave of damaging little molecules called free radicals. When our body's own defenses get overwhelmed by them, that's when we get sick.
And that theory leads him to some really radical treatment ideas for things like sepsis, which, is often fatal. He argues that giving more and more antibiotics is just senseless if you aren't dealing with the root cause, which he says is that tsunami of free radicals. So for him, the logical next step is simple. You have to give something that can neutralize them, and fast. And in this story, the hero is always high-dose IV vitamin C.
Next up, we get to one of the book's most controversial sections: his full-on assault on statins, those super common drugs for lowering cholesterol. He doesn't just question if they work, he basically frames their entire existence as a massive, deliberate deception.
And he kicks off this whole chapter with one bombshell of a question. He literally asks if the science behind cholesterol and statins is a lie designed to sell billions of dollars of drugs that he claims do almost nothing in the real world.
So how does he possibly make that case? Well, according to him, it all comes down to a little trick with statistics. He says drug companies love to use what's called relative risk, a 36% reduction in heart attacks. Wow, that sounds amazing. But he argues the real story is in the absolute risk. In the study he looks at, the risk for the placebo group was 3%, and for the drug group it was about 2%. So the actual difference is just 1%.
And with that logic, he just flips the numbers completely on their head. Instead of a drug that's 36% effective, he presents a drug that, based on his reading of the data from a major study, is 98.9% ineffective over 5 years. I mean, that's a shocking number, and it's designed to make you rethink everything.
And it's not just about them not working. The author spends a lot of time on what he says are the harms of statins. He lists all these common complaints, but then he ties it to a biochemical argument that statins block the body's production of coenzyme Q10, which is absolutely vital for energy, especially in our muscles, including the heart.
Now, the book's next major argument. This might be its most radical. It takes on the very foundation of how we understand cancer, shifting the entire focus away from our genes and onto our metabolism.
So the book basically lays out 2 competing theories. The conventional view, is that cancer is a disease of genetic mutations. But the author, he argues that cancer is actually a disease of our mitochondria, the little powerhouses inside our cells. He claims that when they get damaged, they switch to this really primitive way of making energy that runs almost entirely on sugar, on glucose.
And this leads to his main point. If cancer is a metabolic disease that feeds on glucose, well then the treatment should also be metabolic. So the book proposes the ketogenic diet as a core therapy, with the goal of starving cancer cells by cutting off their favorite food source.
So how would that even work? Well, according to the book, our healthy cells are pretty clever. They're metabolically flexible. They can switch from using glucose for fuel to using something called ketones, which are made from fat. But cancer cells, he argues, have lost that flexibility. They're addicted to glucose. So the idea is that a ketogenic diet could, in theory, feed your body while starving the tumor.
So, let's step back for a second. When you take all these arguments together, about vitamin C, about statins, about cancer, what kind of picture do they paint? Well, they paint a picture of a medical system that, according to the author, has completely lost its way.
The one single thread that ties every single chapter together is this central thesis. The author suggests over and over that simple, cheap, non-patentable therapies, like vitamin C or a specific diet, are ignored or even actively suppressed because there's just no money in them. The story he's telling is of a system that puts patented drugs and profits ahead of patient health.
And all of that leaves us right here with this final essential question. The book says it wants to empower patients, to get them to ask questions and seek out their own information. But in a world of really complex science and life-or-death health decisions, where exactly do we draw the line between encouraging critical thinking and promoting ideas that could be dangerously misleading? That really is the fundamental tension at the very heart of hidden therapies.